There is a lot of people say, like, why don't we learn another language or do other things during this time of crisis? And actually, that's why we are here together, I think, because this is your first lessons in a language that's called SDGs. I think it's very important to familiarize yourself with the language that's called the SDG language. And we'll look at that today in detail with a couple of participants, and we'd love to hear from you as well during the time of Q&A. I want to specify that this was initially planned to be a workshop for international federations. So we'll have a strong focus on international sport federations who, but decided to open it up to others as well. So there are also a lot of non-sport organizations or non-federations participating in this call. Our session today is really breaking down in 3 parts with 3 panelists. We want to take roughly half of our time to really look through these 3 things: why it's important to learn the language of SDG, how do federations apply this, and we'll hear from an example from the UCI, and thirdly, how does the IUC support the role of sport to advance on the SDGs. And as I said before, we have 3 speakers, and I think history is catching up on a few things because we have an entirely female panel here. Aileen McManamon, Isabella Burczak, and Julie Duffus. Myself, I'm moderating. I'm making sure we connect the dots and we stay within the time. We plan to finish the session at 10 o'clock, but we'll hear from the 3 different women on their respective experiences. Now, before we get started with Aileen, just 2 minutes on Sport and Sustainability International. You might be familiar with, you might not be familiar with. It is an organization that was created and is hosted here in Geneva. What we do as Sport Sustainability International is that we want to accelerate sustainability in and through sport, not just in sport, but also through sport. And to do that, we've set ourselves 3 goals for the year 2030. In 10 years from now, what we would like to work towards, what we would like to contribute to as SandSI are climate, waste, and health related. The first one, to become carbon neutral as sports sector by 2030 in alignment with the Paris Agreement 2015. The second one, to address the waste problem we have, the sports sector to become 0 waste. But the third one is also through sport, we can reach much further than the sports sector. We want the sports sector to contribute to a 15% reduction on physical inactivity, which is a goal set by the World Health Organization through the GAPA program. And we would like to contribute to that as SandSI as well. SandSI is a membership organization. We love logos, we love pictures. Here we see some of the members that we are currently counting. We have organizers of sport events, NGOs, also athletes, para-athletes, professionals, students being part of the SandSI network right now. And as SandSI, we are currently developing 2 programs. One is called Football for Climate, and I will not talk about that today. The second one is called the SDG Sport Lab, which, as you can see here, is a creative platform that we are developing to encourage, share, and support concrete initiatives that use sport to contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. #SDG Sport. That is the reason, that is the argument that we have this session today, is to introduce the topic and to facilitate the discussions between organizations on this theme. Without any further ado, because this is not about SandSI, if you have any questions about SandSI, I'm sure you can find ways afterwards to connect. I would like to introduce Aileen McManamon, who is the founder of 5T Sport and also works at SandSI as the chair of the membership working group. Aileen has a rich experience in working with the SDGs, and I would like to pass the microphone to her to ask her to take us through some of her experiences. Aileen.
Okay. So yes. I think you can hear me now, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, terrific. I'm not sure I'm seeing a slide control, so I'll leave that to you here, I guess, to There we go. So greetings. I'm reaching you today now from Vancouver, Canada. And if you click, I can show you exactly where I'm reaching you from. You can, there you go, that little arrow, that's where I'm sitting right now. It looks exactly like that. No, actually it's quite dark. So if you can go to the next slide.
You can control yourself.
Can I? I don't. Oh, okay. Oh, I see it now. Thank you. Okay. Oh, it went away again. There we are. Great. So just a very brief background, what I've done, where I've come from. Oh, it keeps going. I'm not sure I do have total control. There. Okay. So before I founded 5T, I worked in brand strategy and marketing for Fiat and for Alfa Romeo in Germany, and then in the technology sector doing the same brand strategy before I came into the sports industry. And I've lived in a few different places in Germany, in the US, and Canada. And for the last 12 years, I've been a sustainability professional exclusively in sport. And what 5T does is focus a bit equally on sustainability strategies for various largely professional sports organizations and on creative development and execution of sustainability campaigns. So because I'm the first up, oh, sorry, I've lost the little controls again here. Geert, maybe it's easier if you just control the slides. There we go. Thanks. Oh, no, one back. There you go. Thank you. Since I'm starting us off, it was suggested that I define sustainability for us today for the purposes of this. And I always find sustainability a very funny word. I think it means a lot of different things to different people, and many people kind of just assume it's the environmental stuff. Other people say very quickly, people, planet, profits. But this slide kind of shows you how I view sustainability. And frankly, it's already embedded in our operations. It's not an extra that we add in as a choice. If anything, when you start to embrace sustainability, what you're doing is starting to use these other assets, respect them and use them in the same way that you use your financial assets. You invest in them, you leverage them, and you see returns on them. So, you know, not so much an extra, but it's already there. It's just that we're kind of not always paying attention. So next slide, please. So like sustainability, that's already there and confronting us, whether we use it or not, or like it or not. Climate change is, of course, our next looming crisis once we get past our immediate looming crisis. And again, this is something that's already embedded in what's happening. It's affecting sports every day. I used to say when I presented this slide in the last couple of years, sports doesn't operate in a bubble, but it seems insane to say that now because we're all very, very well aware of that as we've gone on hold. But it is a good reminder to say that, you know, as this current crisis passes, that the absence of a strategy to address climate change and social issues is simply no longer an option. It's just not optional. Next slide. And the other thing that we're seeing in this is, you know, climate issues are no longer political issues. Overwhelmingly, where you go around the world, the percentage of fans that believe that this is a thing is increasing, and it's overwhelming. That recent BBC poll on UK football fans, 83% said they care about how their club is addressing the environment. A recent white paper out of Australia by Gemba showed that 73.5% of Australian sports fans were passionate about environmental sustainability and believe that sports has a role to play. And even in the US, where folks think that that's just not an issue for many people, 68% of adults polled feel that the federal government isn't doing enough. So the fans are expecting it as well. And if you can hit the next slide for me. But finally, the commercial partners. So if the environmental and fan and social issues weren't enough, these commercial partners who are so very essential to us being able to present sport at the highest levels and to the broadest audiences, and with the most supportive training and athlete care that we can. The people that make that possible are also very, very vested in this. So who is paying attention to that from those commercial partners? Very well done, Geert. You know, it's not just Patagonia, it's not just Unilever, it's everyone. It's all these big guys, the big spenders. All of these and many, many more have embedded sustainability into their strategy, which means it's probably time to make sure that you have it in yours as well. And in fact, as they do that, they've adopted a new language. Next slide. The SDGs, and I know most of you have seen them. For those who haven't, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. It's a very easy language to learn. There's only really 17 phrases in it. So it's something that we should be able to adopt and speak fluently. If you look through the websites of large corporations, you're going to find this language everywhere, not just in their sustainability report, but in the way they speak to their employees, in their communications, in their annual reports. And so as you can imagine, with your partners who are funding many of your operations, it's difficult to stay in a conversation with people when you don't speak that same language, and you certainly have a hard time keeping a meaningful dialogue with them. So I would like to explain the importance of the SDGs in that way, and say it's really critical to staying on top of being able to stay in touch with those partners. So what does that look like when they speak this language? A little bit like this. I call it cracking the code. So in some cases, they're not worried about all 17 of them. They're focused on a few that are really meaningful to them. And I think that's key to hone in on and understand what their values are and what you might be able to offer them in your programming that can speak to those values and really strengthen that partnership, things that you can work on together. And I think we gave you a link to an article that I had written on this a little while ago. But let's give you just one example before I pass that on to the next speakers. If you can go on, one more. So a brand that we all know very well, Adidas, has specifically embraced SDG 14 in Life Below Water in so many ways. I'm sure many of you may be familiar. In fact, I have this pair of shoes that's shown here. I wear them all the time when I speak, that are woven from fishing net fiber that's reclaimed, spun back into fiber and made into the shoes. The sole on that shoe is also a material made by BASF that's recyclable. They've taken then that partnership that they created with Parley for the Oceans, which is the NGO that's harvesting that netting and helping spin it into the yarn, and now created MLS jerseys with their Major League Soccer partnership here in North America. So for several games each year, every single team, and there are now 21 of them in operation, full operation, are wearing a kit of either one of these two blue colors for a period. So they've taken the SDG that they've embraced, put it into their product, put it into this partnership. And the next slide. And just one more example from Adidas, where they started a run for the oceans. And for every kilometer or mile that runners run, $1 is donated to ocean rescue programs. So far to date, they've raised $1 million. And if you look very closely at these slides, you can see that everything that they've put together in that run has been repurposed. So they're walking the talk. And they're going to expect that of the organizations that they partner with. They're not investing all of this money to have that fall down in a partnership or have that not come through in a partnership. And as they go forward, they're going to continue to look to invest in partners who share those values. So my question to you is, what opportunities might you unlock in speaking this language? And I think with that, we'll hand it to Isabella.
Thank you very much for that, Aileen. And we are all trying to migrate from face-to-face meetings to virtual conferences and things, and some go quicker, some learn quicker than others. I just ask your patience if we sometimes struggling a little bit with the technique. We're doing our best, but we're almost 100 people on this call. So we highly appreciate your feedback on things that you thought were going very well and things that we can improve, because we want to do more of these sessions. But just bear with us if sometimes there's a little technical hiccup. For now, I would like to introduce Isabella Burczak to you, who is Advocacy Manager for the International Cycling Federation, UCI, here in Aigle in Switzerland, and who will share more with us about how actually federations, in this case the UCI, is applying the principles of the SDGs to their work. Isabella.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me now. So good morning to everyone. Okay. So as Geert said, so I work for the International Cycling Union based in Aigle, which is a world governing body for cycling, founded in Paris in 1900. So the UCI develops and promotes cycling in close collaboration with our 196 national federations as a competitive sport, but also as a healthy recreational activity and as a means of transport. One of the advantages that we have and are very proud of is that our sport is also a sustainable mode of transport. So we're always looking at how we can work with that angle, how we can help promote it, how can we get more people on bikes for all reasons. And that's part of what I do on a daily basis at the UCI. So if we talk about the SDGs and looking at it from my perspective in terms of cycling, mobility, transport, a sport, a lifestyle, what is that link with the SDGs? And one thing which has been clearly identified within the cycling community and within different cycling advocacy organizations is the wide-ranging impact that cycling has on the SDGs. Looking at least 11 different SDGs which cycling has a positive impact on, but also other potential ones where there could be an indirect impact. And one of our objectives within the UCI is to capitalize on that and to work with that and to help promote that. So more broadly speaking, what steps can an IF take? And these are questions that I asked myself as well at the UCI several years back when we were tackling this topic, saying, well, what exactly should we be doing? How should we be looking at the SDGs? And just wanted to point out maybe a few different pieces of advice, and hopefully you can take this back to your own federations, to your own organizations, and just give you a bit of food for thought in terms of actions you could take. So one is looking at actually including the SDGs in your strategic document. So it's identifying that link between your sport and the SDGs, but then also showing that it has a strategic importance for your federation. So including it in your annual reports, including it in your documentation, and I'll give you an example afterwards. Also identifying and mapping out potential partners. Now, this is something that that we did right off the bat, was looking at who are the partners we should be working on this, who's involved, who's already promoting projects, how can we partner to deliver a valuable partnership proposition. So this was something we did very early as well. Also looking at data and case studies that can help you link your sport with the SDGs. In our case, there are quite a number of documents that that speak about the link between cycling in all forms and the SDGs. So we're always looking at how we can use those, how we can promote those, how we can use them on our website, how we can communicate about them. So it's finding those case studies that you can use. Then again, speaking about partners, is looking at what partnerships can you launch, what collaboration opportunities are out there, and how can you promote them. So then it's looking at how can you activate on that and how can you engage with the public. And again, we'll give you an example to illustrate that. So in terms of documentation, one thing I wanted to show you was our Cycling for All manifesto, which we launched in 2017. And it's a quick 2-page document that highlights our ambition when it comes to promoting cycling for all. And one of the things we did with the manifesto was actually include the SDGs and include that link between cycling and the SDGs. And here, I mean, we targeted the road safety indicator. However, we could have spoken about health, we could have spoken about sustainable cities, could have spoken about many different indicators as well. But that's something that we're also developing in other documentation. Then another example I wanted to show you in terms of activation and what you could do. And one thing we did actually in 2017 was partnering on a public event. So if I take the partnership point that I mentioned before, one of the organizations that we work with is the European Cyclists Federation, which does a lot of work in terms of promoting cycling as a form of transport within Europe. And one of the documents that they produced is the one you can see on the screen, which is Cycling Delivers on the Global Goals. And within the document, they highlight the link between cycling and every single SDG they've identified as being impacted by cycling, providing examples, providing indicators, and providing real data in terms of how that link is made. So we thought that was a fantastic document that should be shared further with more people around the globe. Another organization that we've been working with is the UNECE PEP program, so the Pan-European Program for Transport, Health and Environment. And they are very well advanced when it comes to promoting cycling and walking, when it comes to promoting road safety questions, when it comes to promoting all sorts of questions linked to cycling and walking. So what we did with both organizations, we just move forward, is collaborate, and we decided that it was actually a great opportunity to work together to promote that link between cycling and the SDGs. And we were invited actually by the UNECE to take part in UN Open Day in 2017. So we collaborated on a booth with UNECE, with International Telecommunications Union, the ECF, as well as the Netherlands Permanent Mission in Geneva, and created a booth where people could come, and we offered different types of activities. So what we wanted to do was raise people's awareness when it comes to the benefits of cycling to health and sustainable development. And so at the booth, we had slow races, we had all sorts of quizzes, getting them to understand that link between the SDGs and cycling, different pieces of information about the different organizations, coloring contests, and all sorts of activities for kids. So just had a few pictures I wanted to show you. So here we have the different team members that were working at the booth between the different organizations. And it was also a great opportunity to strengthen that collaborative work that we can do in the future with them. As I said, we had slow races, so just a fun way to get people on a bike. So the slowest person wins. So here we had kids, adults, people of all ages getting on the bikes. We also had, as I mentioned, different quizzes. So at the end of the day, we gave out awards and prizes to different quiz winners. And finally, we had different types of activities for kids. So we had coloring contests, also quizzes for them. But for us, it was really a great opportunity to be able to speak to people, to be able to share the documentation from the ECF. What I didn't mention actually is that we had produced a postcard and a QR code that people could come up to and download the document via the QR code on their phones. and then have access to it after they left. So it was a great way, again, to promote that piece of documentation. So that wraps up. Just wanted to give you a kind of a quick run through of a few pieces of advice, a few examples, hopefully that will help you as you look at what can your federation or organization do when it comes to linking sport and the SDGs.
Well, thank you very much, Isabella, for that. I think it's great to see all the resources that the UCI has, and that's exactly one of the reasons why SandSI is working on this SDG Sport Lab as a way to share and bring together those things and work with organizations and highlight organizations that are doing all this work. So if you would like to learn more or see some concrete examples, because that's questions we often get, but can I have an example of a federation or an organization that has actually done this? Can I see some documents, some case studies or best practices? Please do reach out to us, and we're happy to put you in touch with the respective people. So you can email contact@sandsai.org for that sort of questions. Our next speaker for today, and our last speaker for today, is Julie Duffus, who works at the International Olympic Committee, works with the Olympic movement actors really on advancing on the SDGs. And we would like to hear from Julie how the IOC supports the role of sport in general to advance on the UN SDGs. So Julie, I would like to pass the floor to you and to give you the opportunity to share some of that with us. Probably you can raise your hand, Julie, because I can't give you the access. There we go. There you go, Julie.
Good morning, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Sorry, I've had a few technology issues this morning, so fantastic to be with you all. Good morning and good evening, everybody. I wanted to come on briefly today to talk to you about a bit of work which we have launched now at the IOC, really on the subject of SDGs and the monitoring and creation of indicators, because one of the reasons we're doing it is to help you as sport. Just to go on to my next slide. I think we've already heard, and hopefully everyone on the call is a convert to what sport can do. And if we look at the SDGs, it's evident to me that obviously sport contributes to things like good health, but if you talk to the average person in the streets, how many people, you can move on to the next slide, please, how many people would realize actually the wide impact that sport has on not just society, but on the environment as a whole? And I think this is one of the points which is missing. And I think if we relate it to things like funding that Aileen talked about, we need a sport to come together and show how sport can contribute to wider society and the environment and the opportunities that may open up. Next slide, please. Now, when I talk to a lot of federations, this is generally the kind of picture that I get. It's how on earth do we go about this? How on earth do we track and monitor and prove the contribution that sport has? And it is, I think the SDGs in themselves are relatively simple, but when you start to drill down into them and really start to track and monitor how we contribute to that, obviously it gets a lot more complicated. So we, at the IOC, we saw our role really as trying to work this out, and we've started to work with the Commonwealth Secretariat and various UN agencies and partners around the world on seeing really how we can start this with sport. Next slide, please. So the objectives of us doing this is, I think, first and foremost, actually, is to reduce the burden of doing all of this for all of the sport federations. And when we complete this work, It will be available for all sport to use. I want to make that very clear. We are, obviously we're starting to work with this with the Olympic federations, but we are not going to limit it to that. We will obviously open this up to all sports, because I'm very much a firm believer that we can only make change if all of sports come together on topics like this. But also on top of that, we need to focus on the need to streamline the indicators. If you imagine all of the different sports out there, if every one of us have different indicators for SDGs, it's going to end up in one of those previous pictures of that crazy muddle and a mess. So we really want to try and streamline and align these indicators across the sporting community. We also want to support our partners. The SDG Lab gave the Commonwealth Secretariat the mandate to track sports, and we are supporting them in the creation of the indicators for that. And of course, out of all of this, we as sports will be able to track our progress, and not only to see, how we're delivering against the SDGs, but also by that and doing through that work, we'll be able to identify gaps and needs and set benchmarks as well to push ourselves further in the next coming years. And that's important, because only by identifying the gaps and needs can people like the IOC come in and support sports in closing those gaps and progressing even further. Next slide, please. So the envisaged impact, I've touched on this already, but it's really important that we all start measuring properly the impact that sport has on society and the environment. And this is not just the positives. We also need to address the negatives as well, because only then will we be able to move forward collectively. Excuse me. To measure the influence of sport, I've already spoken about that, and providing benchmarks and specific gaps. But also this can be used as a tool to incentivize others in sport to go even further. If you look at sports, so the big federations, the big organizations like us, right down to the grassroots, if we can find a way to further incentivize people, then we will push the sustainable development agenda further forward, and our partnerships, which I've spoken about. Next slide, please. So the next steps for us, we're in the process at the moment of developing and creating those indicators, and these are just some of the steps which we are having to address and having to look at in order to create those indicators. It's actually quite a complicated process, and we have to go through all of these to make sure that at the end of it, we come out with some indicators which are really relevant for all of us in sport. So they have to be valid. We have to make sure that we can measure them. They have to be consistent and consistent over time. They have to be precise and accurate. They have to be reliable, but also sensitive to changes. And this is changes on many ways, and also adaptable. They have to be practical, because if we at the end of the day go out with a 1,000 questionnaire spreadsheet tool, I don't think we'll get many people filling it out. So it has to be practical, and that's where it's going to be quite complicated, I think. It has to be useful for all of sport communities. It has to be useful for them, and it has to be used and also help them in their decision-making processes on the way forwards. And it has to be owned and accountable. So lots of things that we're doing this year. We hope to have the first draft of this going towards the end of the year. We're doing it with many partners, including the Commonwealth Secretariat. So my final slide, which I thought was quite applicable in this current situation of sitting at home that we're in, is, I guess, watch this space for more. We're very open. Our doors are open to any of you on this call who want to know more about this, or even want to be involved in it. We don't want to do this on our own. It's very important that at the end of this, we come out with something which is good for all of sport to use. So yeah, get in touch and watch this space for more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie, for this insight. That's excellent, but there's a lot of steps, and now I'm a sport organization, I'm a federation. I've heard about one of the concrete things that they can do is become a signatory of the UNFCCC Sport for Climate Action Framework. Could you probably explain a little bit what that means and why a sport organization should become a signatory of that framework?
Absolutely. We co-launched this with the UN back in December 2018 now, and we took a leadership role on this because we saw how important this is, that sport comes together and starts to tackle climate change, not just because the world right now is in a desperate state. It's funny because I see the world really reaching out to the scientists at the moment with this coronavirus and wanting their advice. And yet 99% of the scientists out there are seriously telling us of the consequences and urgency for climate change. And yet there are so many people out there right now ignoring the scientists when it comes to climate change. And we have got to come together as sport to tackle climate change, because if we don't, there are many sports out there, some of the obvious ones being some of the winter sports, who are going to have to seriously adapt in the very, very near future if we want our sport to be sustainable for the long term. So this framework has been created by sport for sport. It's very much dedicated to sport organizations, and I can only urge all of you to join it. It's not a scary framework. Any of you can join it. We've got about 120 sports organizations now joined, and they are from some of the big organizations like FIFA down to very small little local clubs. So it's really a testament really to UNFCCC who created this to show that any of you can join it. It's based on 5 principles, and I can easily send you some more information if anybody would like to join. We have taken on a role to support sports who want to join it, so we will support you through those 5 principles. And yeah, I think any of you on this line who is a sports organization and hasn't joined, please do join, because we are also a contributor to climate change, and we've got to come together as sports to address this, to promote it, and use the platform that sport has, which is an amazing platform to do advocacy and get communities to take more action. So please join.
Thank you. So if we were in a room now, I would ask the people, can you raise your hand if you've ever heard of the UNFCCC Sport for Climate Framework? Can you do that right now? I would like to have an idea. We have roughly, right now, we have 85 people on the call. So let me see, there's a lot of hands. If you're familiar with, if you've heard of it before, I'm not going to count. There's a lot of Geert Hendriks who have heard of this before, but there's at least, like, I see 30, 32. So let's see, roughly 40% of the people on this call, and it keeps going, has ever heard of the framework. Thank you. Now you can stop. Next question. I'm going to make you work a little bit. I'm going to ask you all to raise your hand again. How many of you on the call, can you raise your hand if you are a signatory of this call, of the framework? 5, 7, 8, excellent, more than 10. Julie, you should be happy. We've got like a dozen of people on this call who are part of this this framework.
Fantastic. But yeah, to all of those who aren't, don't be frightened, just go for it, and we're all here to support you as a sporting community.
My last question to you, can you raise your hand if you're a signatory and you would like to just explain in 1 minute why you became a signatory? I'm going to put you on the spot, but that's what I like doing in this sort of sessions. Anyone who would like to say something about it as a signatory? That seems to be a tough question at the early morning.
Yes, on a Friday.
On a Friday morning. Okay. Okay. So we have, I think, about 15 to 20 minutes left. About 15 minutes left for some Q&A. So I think now is a good time to ask any questions that you have, and you can do it by putting it in the Q&A box that we have here, or by putting it in the chat that you can see on the side of your screen normally. Firstly, let's switch to Aileen and Sonia, who've been keeping an eye on the chat box. Has there been any question coming through, Aileen, from the participants that they would like to ask?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, great. Yeah, we do have a question. Hello, Russell. Great to hear from you. Russell Seymour from Basis asks, the 17 goals sit on top of 169 targets. The UN described these as integrated and indivisible. How can sport use these targets, and how can sport justifiably select a subset of the goals to address rather than an integrated response to all of them? Well, I'm happy to take a first crack at it.
You take the first go. You take the first go.
I think, you know, while we don't have a lot of time, sport needs to walk before it can run. So, you know, the first steps are making sure that we're all speaking this language. And I think as sport can look at it, it's like for the sustainability professionals on the call, it's a materiality analysis. What could you reasonably affect within your initial scope? So you start with your own home, and then you work your way outward to leverage your influence. So I think ultimately, sport can address more than it might be able to do in its own house through its influence. But I think it's important to recognize everybody needs to start on the journey in a way that they can manage and not be intimidated by starting at 169 targets. But that's just me.
Isabella, I saw that the UCI has, you selected a few that you felt probably were more applicable, or why did you make a selection, or how did you come to a selection of the 17 goals?
I think you have to unmute her, and then she has to unmute herself.
Yes, Isabella, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't actually select them per se. What I shared was actually the work that was done by the European Cyclists Federation, who looked at where does cycling have an impact, and which goals and which indicators can cycling have an impact on. And so we often reference actually this work that was done by them, but also in working with different organizations, for instance, World Bicycle Relief. They also, in their annual report, reference a lot of their work to how they've contributed to achieving the targets set by the UN SDGs. So within our own reporting mechanisms, we don't do that yet. Hoping that as we move forward, we'll start building a greater link to the UN SDGs, and how kind of the work that we're doing when it comes to cycling for all and cycling advocacy can actually be translated into the UN SDGs, but we're not there yet. But definitely one way to do it, and kind of that example from World Bicycle Relief, I think is quite an interesting one, in that they really try to show how the impact of their work impacts the SDGs.
Okay, okay.
And by the way, Geert, I see Jonathan Smith,
Yes.
hello, Jonathan, has responded as well on this, and said some people and organizations are taking tiered approaches. So 2 to 3 layers of goals are prioritized, not totally excluding any, but emphasizing probably where they can make the most impact.
And another question that I saw coming in is like where to start in these times. Like, it was a very pragmatic question from someone, and it was difficult to identify who it said, but how did you start on this journey, Isabella?
It's kind of when we were putting together our Cycling for All manifesto and trying to highlight what we're trying to achieve when it comes to promoting cycling for health, cycling for transport, cycling for recreation. I think what we started doing was mapping out what are things we're trying to achieve, what are the different initiatives and programs we should link that to, what are examples of initiatives we want to deliver on. So we've included it's a bit of a mix of all of that in the manifesto, and it was published in 2017. So if I had to present it today, I think it would be a little bit different. So that probably is a piece of work we might be doing in the coming months, is updating the manifesto. But I think, yeah, it was looking at kind of where can we have an impact. And just recently too, this year, the UCI has been included in a number of working groups, including I think the working group that Julie mentioned, working with the Commonwealth and the indicators for sport and SDGs. So trying to see how we can be part of these different discussion groups, how we can be part of proposing action plans forward, and just trying to see how we can be further involved in this topic with other organizations, because in the end, kind of alone as the UCI, we're not going to get very far. But if we work with different UN agencies, if we work with the IOC, if we work with different organizations that are focused on the SDGs, I think we'll get much further.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Julie, I don't know if you're back. If we can.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
How would you?
Sorry, I dropped out.
No worries.
So here's a question in the chat, Geert, and this might be a very good one for you, Julie. And this is from Blanca. It says, hi, based on your experiences, would you recommend to work with an external organization specialized in M&E? I'm not sure
monitoring evaluation.
Okay. In order to create such indicators. Thank you so much. So Julie, that's very on point for you.
That's actually quite a tricky question to answer if I don't know your organization and what capabilities I think you would have in-house. I would be tempted to say, as I said in my presentation, that I think people need almost to wait for this set of indicators to come out for the SDGs, and then perhaps see how you would track and monitor that collectively. Because if we get to the end of the year and a sport organization has created their own indicators against SDGs, and then the Commonwealth Secretariat come out with another set, you're almost going to be doubling your work in a sense. So I would say it very much depends on the capabilities that you have in-house and whether you need to go out to a consultancy to get that expertise in. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
just moving to another question that I see coming in from Ziga, who is from the International Automobile Federation, one of the signatories of the UNFCCC framework. Quite interesting. What are the possible risks and challenges if we don't do anything, if we don't engage in the SDGs as a sports sector? Any of the three who wants to take on that? What if we do nothing?
I like this one. Well,
okay, you go.
Maybe not the SDGs per se, but I can tell you, I don't know if you've monitored or seen what's happened with the US Soccer Federation, the women's national team, Coca-Cola and Volkswagen in the last couple of weeks. But
just tell us briefly.
Because of the lawsuit that the US women's national team has brought around gender equality and gender equity in pay, in some of the language that they used, the US Soccer Federation. Coca-Cola and Volkswagen both made very public announcements, including taking out full-page advertising denouncing their partner, the US Soccer Federation. So in short, whether it's SDG-based or you're just talking about values in general, there can be very short-term repercussions, and they can happen very quickly.
Yeah, so that's one of the risks. Anything else to add, Isabelle or Julie?
I think Eileen's touched on the most important one, and also, you know, reputation is could become a reputational risk, especially we've seen the last couple of years how much the world is moving to wanting, especially sport, to respond on sustainability.
Mm.
And also, if we don't adapt as well, I mean, we're putting our sport at risks if we don't learn to adapt as well.
Yeah. So, and just as a point of note, I think there are over 10,000 corporations or commercial partners who are signed on with the SDGs through the UN Global Compact. So that's quite a lot. That's quite a lot. So again, back to the point, if it pays to learn this language, there are a lot of people speaking it now.
Yeah.
And I think also we'll see quite a movement now. So the work that we're doing with the Commonwealth Secretariat is also on a government level. So governments now are starting to respond. And once they really understand how they're going to do that, they're going to start coming down on all those in their countries to start responding to SDGs as well. So there will come that risk as well. If you wait for too long, you're going to have to respond pretty quickly on a government level as well as a society level. Yeah.
Thank you. There's an interesting one coming in from Samir from the FISU, Multisport Federation, and it might be one for you, Julie, if you can respond to that. How do you tackle working with a wide range of sports? Because they see a lot of opportunities, but it's also complexity of being a multi-sport federation. And how can we tackle working with such a variety of sports? What angle would you look from to get started?
Yeah, well, we have to deal with a lot of different sports. We deal with the Olympic federations, but also the recognized federations as well. So you're looking at 80 odd different sports here. So I guess it's in our DNA to take account of those. But with the SDGs, I think we're going to have to learn to put together the indicators in a way, and I think it will actually be easier than it sounds in order to make them sport specific. And then of course you as a sport, like Isabella said, would respond more on that direct sport. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but I'm happy to take that offline if you want, if I could, and then I can go through the different processes that we are working on with the different sports. So it's probably, I could spend hours talking about that.
Okay, we have about 4 minutes left, so we'll let you take that offline with FISU, Samir. It's part of the objective of this webinar is also getting these sort of topics out. And making sure that it's being addressed. And once more, if you have certain specific topics within the context of the SDGs that you would like to see being addressed by us through a webinar, for example, feel free to put it in the chat as well. For now, I want to take one last question from Antoine Olivier. Not exactly sure which organization representing, but talking about communication, and then probably Isabelle, if you don't mind responding to that one. He says, at the moment we are doing a lot of Geneva Marathon. Thank you, Antoine. At the moment we're doing a lot of, at our level of sport event organizer, but it's very difficult to communicate what we are doing. What's your advice on that point when it comes to communication, what you're doing?
Yeah, so I work very closely with our communications team, and what we decided to do very early on, because the UCI has different social media platforms, and we decided to create our own Cycling for All Twitter feed. It's maybe a small detail, but we thought it was a great way for the UCI to get speaking about topics related to transport, to health, to sustainability, that weren't necessarily on the main UCI platforms, but gave us a way to exchange with kind of with the Twitter community and put posts out there very regularly, knowing that we wouldn't be able to put them on the main UCI one. So that was one kind of direction we took. Then it's also creating content for the website. So I'm constantly writing articles for our website, trying to find topics that relate to transport, talking about sustainable cities, talking about best practices. We have a project called the UCI Bike City Label, which are cities that host events, but also have plans for, or have very clear strategies to promote cycling for the population. So we're always highlighting the work they do. So just looking at different platforms we can use and communicating, and then being part of conferences, of forums, sharing the projects that we're doing. I'm often knocking on doors when it comes to either events or different forums proposing topics and content. So it's also kind of work from my side to see kind of where can we be more involved and where can we contribute. So not sure if that answers the questions, but it's just a few of the strategies that we've taken. And then, yeah, working very closely with our comms team in terms of seeing how we can further promote cycling for all.
Yeah. Be part of the comms team, integrate and have these discussion on a regular basis to make sure you don't forget that part of the puzzle. Well, this brings us to the end of this this webinar. Feel free to continue sending us messages. Before we close, just a little plug for SandSI. We are a membership organization. We continue to do these things, but we would love to have you as members joining SandSI. There's all sorts of information available on our website, and we'll send an email with some things as well. But here is just a quick insight in why it would make sense for you to become a member of SandSI, and do reach out to us if you would like to know more about that. Rest me nothing else than give a round of applause to Julie, Isabelle, and Aileen virtually for all the work and the time they took to share with us their insight, for answering the questions. I hope you enjoyed your first lesson, SDGs. I hope you enjoyed this first webinar. This is the start of a new beginning. This is the start of the SDG Sport Lab. Do keep an eye on Twitter, SDG Sport. You will hear more from us. And again, if you do have any suggestions or questions for the lab, send an email to contact@sandsci.org. And if you would like to know more about SandSI or become a member, there's a link here as well. Keep the conversation going. We are working towards a workshop where we would actually meet face-to-face once we have the opportunity again in Lausanne with the international federations. But we are developing different things that will be launched in the next months, depending on how flexible we are. You will receive an email in a few days with a recording of the webinar and some additional information that we shared, and hopefully also some contact details if you want to follow up with a specific person on this. So thank you very much for attending. I wish you an excellent remainder of the day, whether it's very late or very early, and I hope to see you at our next SDG Sport Lab event. Thank you.
Thanks, Geert. Thanks for hosting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.